All right. Okay, so so the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. That's really important. Mitochondria will be present in both animal and plant cells, okay? And that's because, well, plants need to grow still, right? They need to be able to produce energy so they can get bigger. And then the second one, really important one, chloroplasts. These are the sites of photosynthesis. Chloroplasts are green. Okay, that's what makes, well, not at this time of year, but in like the spring, like when it's warmer out and when it's like summer, that is what is going to be responsible for the green color of leaves and plants and stuff, okay? Chloroplasts, for the sake of science 10, chloroplasts are only found in plant cells, okay? It gets a little sticky, like there are some types of cyanobacteria. These are bacteria that live in like the ocean, and they are able to photosynthesize. Okay, but for the sake of science 10, only plant cells will have chloroplasts. Okay. If you're interested in chloroplasts and the process of photosynthesis, you will learn that in detail in Bio 20 if you're interested in that. Okay. Okay, so let's just get right into it. So cell anatomy, number one, and probably the most important organelle is the nucleus. Okay, this is where DNA is stored, and it controls all cellular activity, okay? The nucleus is like the brain of the cell, essentially, okay? So, we'll call it the brain of the cell. And when we were doing the intro to biology lesson, remember we talked about DNA makes something, which makes something, which makes something else. So remember DNA, it starts as DNA in our nucleus, which will then make RNA, which will then be read by ribosomes, actually, and we will talk about those soon, which will call for amino acids, which make proteins. And remember, proteins are like the workers of cells, right? Proteins are really, really important for us. Okay? So that is the nucleus. This is a need to know. Absolutely need to know. Okay? You need to know what the nucleus does. DNA is stored in there. Okay? Second, we have the cell membrane. Okay? So this is the outside of the cell. The cell membrane. This is a flexible boundary that controls the movement of materials inside and outside of the cell. What decides can come in, what decides can go out. Okay? We have a model for the cell membrane. It's called the fluid mosaic model. Okay? We will talk more about that later on. Fluid mosaic model. Okay, it is flexible, it is not stiff or rigid. Okay, like think about your cells, right? In like your arm, right now I'm bending it. If it was rigid, some of those cells might break, right? So they need to be kind of flexible. Okay, next we have the cytoplasm, and this is the jelly-like material found throughout the cell, okay? So cytoplasm is just kind of the fluid that surrounds organelles and is inside of the cell membrane, okay? So you can kind of think of the cytoplasm as like a shock absorber for the cell, right? Same kind of thing, like if you get body checked in hockey or something like that, like your organelles are not just gonna like come together and squish and explode, right? You have like a little bit of a shock absorber within that cytoplasm itself, okay? Now, remember earlier this week I said we were going to be doing a pizza lab next week. So one thing that could be really helpful to kind of understand like cell anatomy is making an analogy to like food things, okay? So nucleus, you can kind of pick anything for a nucleus as long as it's, nucleus is not too picky, but cell membrane. if we're making a pizza, right, what's on the outside of a pizza?
Crust.
The crust, right? Crust kind of contains everything within that pizza, right? So cell membrane, this could be like our crust. Okay, it's the outside of the cell, kind of keeps everything contained. Okay? And then next to the cytoplasm, what is found all throughout the pizza? Pizza sauce, yeah. Okay, perfect. That's it. Yeah, that's perfect. So pizza sauce. Perfect. It's found throughout the cell. Okay, that's a really good analogy. Excellent. Okay. So cytoplasm could be like pizza sauce. Okay. Next we have the mitochondria. So this is a need to know. Okay, this one's really important. This is the powerhouse of the cell. And this will break down glucose, which is like the sugars in the food that you eat. It will break down glucose into the energy the cell can use. And remember, this is like roughly speaking what glucose looks like. And when you are digesting glucose, you're breaking these bonds. And what happens when you break bonds? Yeah, energy is released, right? So we break those bonds. Energy the cell can so energy the cell can use, we call this ATP. Okay, and don't worry too much about ATP. You'll learn more about that in Bio 20. Okay, but that is like the currency of our cells is ATP. Okay, a good analogy for like glucose and ATP. So within one molecule of glucose, there's a lot of energy in there, okay? So let's say that a molecule of glucose is a $100 bill, okay? If you go and you're gonna buy something from the vending machine typically only accepts what? Loonies and toonies kind of thing, right? So we can think of ATP as being like loonies and toonies. And glucose is like a $100 bill, okay? Lots of energy in glucose. Our cells cannot use that much energy. It's like a vending machine not being able to use a $100 bill, okay? Our cells like to use like smaller packets of energy, and that is called ATP. So the ATP is like loonies and toonies, okay? Next we have ribosomes, okay? Sorry, I should have mentioned, so mitochondria are these like little bean-shaped organelles. So bean-shaped organelles, what do you think would be a good analogy for a mitochondria?
Bean.
Yeah, perfect, right? This is a bean. Okay. Yeah, so like mitochondria, ribosomes, some of these organelles, when you're thinking of finding like an ingredient to like represent that, try to make it kind of shaped similar to that, okay? So yeah, so next we have ribosomes. These are present in the cytoplasm. So remember the cytoplasm is just like the jelly-like fluid that surrounds all of the organelles, right? Okay, so these are present in the cytoplasm and on the ER. Okay, ER is our next organelle, and that is called the endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, we can just call that one the ER. Okay, so ribosomes are present on the ER. So if we look, so we have our nucleus right here. This is the big purple thing right here. Okay. The endoplasmic reticulum surrounds the nucleus, okay? So this organelle right here is your endoplasmic reticulum. And these little bumps that you see up here, those are going to be your ribosomes. Okay? Remember when I said DNA makes RNA, makes proteins, right? Hello.
Can I still work for a few minutes?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so remember when I said DNA makes RNA, makes proteins? RNA makes proteins, is what ribosomes will do. They will actually attach onto that RNA, and they're going to essentially like recruit those amino acids, which are going to be coded in the RNA itself. Okay? So ribosomes present in the cytoplasm and in ER. So when like a piece of RNA is like kind of sent out of the nucleus, a ribosome is ready outside of the nucleus, ready to read it, and it's ready to code for amino acids, which will make a protein. Okay? Okay. So ribosomes, you need to know that proteins are synthesized here. Okay, that is very important. And you need to know where they are present. Okay. So the endoplasmic reticulum, we have two types of endoplasmic reticulum. One, we have a smooth ER. Okay, they call it smooth ER because there are no ribosomes present on there. Okay, when you look at endoplasmic reticulum with ribosomes present, it looks kind of bumpy, kind of like sandpaper, I guess. And that's why they call it the rough ER, because the ribosomes are present there. It makes it kind of look bumpy. In the smooth ER, no ribosomes, so it's smooth, doesn't look bumpy or anything like that. Okay. The smooth ER will make lipids, and the rough ER will make proteins, right? Remember, ribosomes are the sites of protein synthesis. So if we have rough ER around the nucleus, it's going to make those proteins, which is whatever is coded in this RNA. Okay? How are we doing so far? Good? All right. So these first 6 organelles that I've talked about, they're all need to know, okay? These first 6 organelles are really important. Okay, this moves us into the Golgi apparatus. So this is this like blue looking structure here. So it receives substances from the endoplasmic reticulum. Remember, so like if it's a rough ER, rough endoplasmic reticulum, they're going to be making proteins there, okay? And then Golgi apparatus is responsible for transporting substances out of the cell, okay? So maybe you ate a meal, your blood sugar is increasing, there's a chemical signal that is communicated to the cell, and then the cell might start producing insulin, right? To get your blood sugar lower than it currently is and get that glucose into your cells, essentially. Okay, where it will be stored as glycogen. Okay, so Golgi apparatus transports substances. I know this is not a pizza analogy, but you can think of the Golgi apparatus as like a shipping warehouse. Okay? Right, so if it receives substances from like a manufacturer, right, and then it will transport those substances wherever it needs to be shipped, essentially. Okay, lysosomes. These break down waste products and other foreign material, okay? So these kind of like clean up your cell. A student last semester kind of made the analogy, lysosomes, it's like a Lysol wipe, right? It's like cleaning up the cell for you, okay? So lysosome, Lysol wipe, it's going to break down waste and other foreign material that we don't want, okay? Lysosomes are really important, helping us like fight off viruses and bacteria. Okay, next we have the cytoskeleton. And this is an internal network of fibers. Hi.
Cordell, you have to come with me.
Okay. This is an internal network of fibers used for cellular transport. Okay. So cytoskeleton is what is used to transport those things throughout maybe like the cell or throughout the body. Okay, cytoskeleton. These, so you're gonna have a few different types of cytoskeleton. You have like microtubules, just to name one. Okay, so there's a few different types of those, and this is where your motor proteins are actually gonna be like walking along your muscle fibers to allow muscle contraction or like locomotion. Okay, so cytoskeleton is kind of like everywhere in the cell. So a really good pizza analogy for the cytoskeleton will be cheese. Thanks, it's kind of like over everywhere. Are there any dietary restrictions in this classroom? Yeah, what do you?
Gluten.
Gluten? Okay, so gluten-free pizza crust, then you'll be okay? Yeah. Cool. Okay. So these three are not like really important need to know, but you still need to know what they do. Okay. So the previous 9 organelles that we just talked about, these are going to be found in both plant and animal cells. Okay. So the last 9 organelles are in both plant and animal cells. The next one we're going to talk about is plant cell anatomy. Okay, so we're talking about only plant cells right now. Okay, not animal cells, plant cells only. Okay, so plant cells are different than animal cells because they have a cell wall. This is a rigid outer portion of the cell, and this provides shape and support. Okay, so we have our like plasma membrane on the outside, right? So they still have plasma membranes, but the cell wall is much more rigid than the cell membrane, and this is going to allow some of our like trees to get as big as they do because they have cell walls. Okay, it's a little bit stronger than an animal cell. Cell walls are going to be found in plants, fungi will have cell walls, bacteria and some protists, but for the sake of Science 10, just plants only have cell walls, okay? Second, we have chloroplasts. So these two are really important. I would say these two are need to knows. Chloroplasts, we talked about this a little bit already. These are the sites of photosynthesis. These will be found in like cyanobacteria, as I mentioned earlier, and some protists, but for the sake of Science 10, chloroplasts are only found in plant cells. Okay? These two are need to knows. All right. Okay, next we have vacuoles. Okay, vacuoles will store water for plants. They'll also store other substances. We'll talk about vacuoles later. But one thing I want you to just know is that when a plant is like dehydrated or like it's running out of its water stores, celery is probably the best example. When celery has not been watered, it kind of wilts, right? If you put that in your fridge and you don't eat it for like a week or two, it's going to get kind of, it wilts. You know, it's not as rigid as it would be before. But if you put that celery back into a cup of water, through a process called osmosis, which we will learn about, it's going to draw that water back up into the celery, and then it will become rigid and you can eat it a couple days later. Okay, so that is directly related to the vacuoles. Okay, so think of the vacuole as like a storage facility. Okay. Okay, so those are 3 organelles that are found only in plant cells. Okay, so if I ask you to tell me an organelle or tell me some similarities and differences between plant and animal cells, you could say, well, they all have a nucleus, they all have ribosomes, they have Golgi apparatus, okay? But plant cells are different from animal cells in that they have a cell wall, chloroplast, and a vacuole, okay? So that would be a really good answer for that. Okay, now we're jumping into animal cell. Okay, so these are, what we're talking about now is just related to animal cells, okay? So it does not have a cell wall. Remember, we want our cells to be like flexible, right? And kind of squishy. Remember, I said that cell walls allow trees to get really tall, right? What allows us to get tall or to grow like kind of higher up if we don't have a cell wall to support us? What do we have to support us? Yeah, our skeleton, right? For sure. So we have just a different adaptation than plants, right? We have an actual skeleton, whereas plants will have like cell walls to support their structure, okay? Okay, so centrioles, these are involved in cell division. They are responsible for making sure that the chromosomes are lined up properly, what we call the anaphase plate. Okay, if they are not lined up to like properly, sometimes you can have like genetic defects from that if you don't have like proper chromosome separation during mitosis or meiosis. That's just during cell division. Okay, so centrioles are really important. And lastly, they have cholesterol in their membranes to increase fluidity. Okay, so if you go up north and you find a polar bear and you were to look at the cell membrane of a polar bear, because they live in a much cooler climate than we do, right? They're going to have more cholesterol, so their cells will remain rigid, right? If they didn't have cholesterol in there, when you get into that like really cold Arctic temperatures, it's likely that if they didn't have cholesterol in the membranes, the cells would break a little bit easier, okay? So that cholesterol is kind of like a shock absorber for the cell, essentially. Okay, so similarities between plant cells and animal cells. They have cell membranes and cytoskeletons. DNA is located in the nucleus. Differences: plants have a cell wall, a large central vacuole, and there's also a presence of chloroplasts in plant cells, not animal cells. In plant cells. Animal cells do not have chloroplasts. Okay? So far so good? I know there's a lot of organelles we talked about today. But yeah, you guys should review these tonight and a couple times just to kind of get that into your brains. Okay? Okay, so the cell membrane.